also depicted in the movie, shows just how concerned the astronauts were about their own mental state. Jack Swigert scribbles a note to himself to make sure he doesn't inadvertently hit the wrong switch.
That is accurate. He was alone in the command module. Jim Lovell and Fred Hayes were in the lunar module. And one of those switches was jettison the lunar module. And in the movie, when he explains what he's done, Tom Hanks, as Jim Lovell says, that's good thinking.
On April the 17th, after 4 days of fighting to stay alive, the astronauts were now just hours away from their biggest challenge: re-entering Earth's atmosphere. As the movie shows, Lovell had to make a course correction with a fuel burn of precisely 22.4 seconds. If they miscalculated the angle of re-entry, they'd either burn up or bounce off, which they felt was worse.
If we were not successful in getting back, then we could be perhaps in an elliptical orbit, and we would be doing that for a considerable length of time, perhaps as far as we're concerned, forever.
As far as the astronauts knew, if they missed their mark, Apollo 13 would become their floating tomb, orbiting forever as a memorial to NASA's failure. To make it back through Earth's atmosphere, they first had to turn electrical power back on, using much of what was left of their precious battery reserve.
The biggest concern I had was, how would the mothership be? How do you power up this mothership that was never intended to be powered down?
The systems that normally would have heaters keeping them warm and keeping them functioning at their optimum level had now been cold soaked. So you had no idea. In fact, the odds were greater that something was going to go wrong than that things would go well.
We weren't going to have any second chances.
The astronauts had a stroke of luck. The command module powered up without a hitch. But was it fit to take the punishment of re-entry? As they prepared for re-entry, the crew of Apollo 13 jettisoned the service module. As it careered away, they hurriedly snapped this picture of the damage. It didn't reveal what caused the explosion, but it did raise fears there was further damage that might still kill them.
And there's one whole side of that big piston.
Is that right?
The whole panel is blown out, almost from the base to the engine.
That really worried us because that could also have damaged our heat shield, which was our only hope of getting back through the atmosphere safely.
3 hours later, it was time to jettison the lunar module, the lifeboat which had carried them so close to home. An emotional moment in the movie.
Farewell, Aquarius. We thank you.
It was a line in real life. It had done so much work that it was never designed to do, that nobody ever imagined it would do. It was easy to fall in love with it. It had given these men back their lives.
With re-entry now just moments away, one big question remained. Was the heat shield that protected the capsule from burning up in Earth's atmosphere still intact?
The world was watching and praying, and the montage we show at the end of the movie of people all over the planet stopping and watching, this was real.
As the Odyssey capsule entered Earth's atmosphere, the intense heat caused so much electrical interference, there was a communications blackout with Houston. That was typical, but no returning capsule had ever been out of radio contact for longer than 3 minutes.
There was no invention and no hyperbole there. At the end of 3 minutes, we will know if they're alive or if they're dead.
The ground controller who would make first contact with the crew, if they were still alive, was Joe Kerwin.
Everybody was standing or sitting around, and 3 minutes go by. Still didn't hear anything, and that's when Cran said, "Tell them we're standing by."
Odyssey, Houston, standing by, over.
No answer. Let a half minute go by. Odyssey, Houston, standing by. No answer, another half minute. Odyssey, Houston, standing by.
Everyone at that time, for the first time in this entire mission, had just a split second of doubt that maybe something went wrong.
The seconds continued to crawl by.
That was the longest minute and a half, minute and 27 seconds to be precise, that anyone in mission control has ever spent. In fact, there's a picture that someone snapped of all the flight directors standing, staring, looking at those clocks, and that is probably the most graphic picture that came out of Apollo 13.
And just about then you could hear a little change in the nature of the static, as if some radio was on there. And a few seconds after that, and everybody relaxed because we knew they were okay.
No one at that moment knew what had caused the extra period of dead air, but it didn't take NASA long to work it out. On re-entering Earth's atmosphere, it's normal to lose radio contact for a short period of time. Returning spacecraft aim to hit the atmosphere at an angle of 6.5 degrees, making the radio blackout 3 minutes long. But Apollo 13 hit at a shallower angle, and so the blackout persisted much longer than anyone anticipated. But even inside Earth's atmosphere, the astronauts were still in mortal danger.
One of the last things I had to worry about was the 3 parachutes.
The explosive charges for deploying the parachutes had been ice cold for 4 days.
We couldn't afford the electrical power to keep them warm. And if the pyrotechnics didn't fire to put out the parachutes, of course, we would have been right on course, hitting the ocean just where we should have been. However, at a speed that would be much too high to be survivable.
Parachutes burst out right on cue. And this was the moment when the world realized the astronauts were home safely. For some, the real story of Apollo 13 was almost too good to be true.
I do a lot of preview screenings, and in this case, it was always very positive. Our test scores were fantastic. But suddenly I come across one card, and they rate it poor. And they definitely wouldn't recommend it. And so I went all the way down, and it said, please comment on the ending. And in big, bold block letters, he spelled out, awful, more Hollywood bull. They would never survive. And I thought, well, okay, he didn't know it was a true story. Great.
The movie ends with the astronauts' triumphant return, but it barely touches on the cause of the accident. Tom Hanks briefly mentions a faulty coil as the cause of the explosion. But the true story is more complex. When NASA experts started to comb through a mass of data trying to reconstruct what went wrong, an extraordinary picture began to emerge. The accident had been caused by an incident 2 weeks before the launch, while Apollo 13 was still sitting on the pad at Cape Canaveral. Following a dress rehearsal, technicians had to empty oxygen tank number 2 for safety reasons. When they switched on the heating rod in the tank to burn off the liquid oxygen, the thermostat controlling the heater fused shut. And they didn't realize the tank continued to heat up long after the liquid oxygen had gone.
We know now from laboratory tests that the temperature got up to about 900 to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit in that tank.
That intense heat burned off the insulation covering the wires inside the tank, and so it was critically damaged before the mission even began.
And when we put liquid oxygen in the tank on the day of the launch, it was a bomb waiting to go off.
When Jack Swaggart stirred the liquid oxygen by switching on a small electrical fan inside the tank, that bomb exploded.
So we'd like it to stir up your cryo tanks.
A spark jumps between the fan and the heater assembly and blows the dome of the tank off. When the dome came off, the insulation surrounding the tank caught fire, and fed by the oxygen, it was like a blowtorch racing through the bay of the spacecraft.
When I found out about it post-flight, I was very sad that it was really one little component that was the cause of our demise and the loss of the landing mission.
Apollo 13, the movie, has been lauded as a largely accurate take on history. And for the most part it is. But there's one element where Hollywood gave history some help. It's Jack Swaggart who first says,
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
Then 15 seconds later, Jim Lovell joins in.
Houston, we've had a problem.
Oh, that's what it is. Yes. Houston, we've had a problem. Just not quite as sharp and dramatically interesting. It's not quite as clean as the Houston, we have a problem.
So what does the man who never said it think of that celebrated line?
I wish I had, what's the word I want to use? Registered, I guess, or something like that. Houston, we have a problem is something that's in the public domain now, and I'm kind of glad about that.
It's a little bit like when myth becomes fact, print the myth. That's sort of what's happened with that line of dialogue.
And if art borrowed from life, it happened the other way too. In the film, Gene Kranz coins the phrase, "Failure is not an option." He never said those words, but he liked the sound of them so much, that's what he called his autobiography.
The first time you see yourself, you sort of slink down in your chair and you look to see what the other people are thinking about it. But then it was interesting. Ron Howard and Tom Hanks did such a compelling story that after that first 30 seconds that you see yourself on the screen, you're wrapped up in the movie and you're getting after that team. Get those guys home. Pay attention to your data. Get with it. I mean, you just really want to get these guys going.
I had the opportunity to have lunch with Billy Wilder, who I idolized, and he cited Apollo 13, and he said, I think it's your best work, and he said, and here's what I loved about it. It was a movie about a guy who didn't get his dream, and that's what made it so remarkable.
If there's a legacy for the movie Apollo 13, it's a reminder that this is a joint enterprise. It's not just 3 guys in a can. It's thousands more at the Kennedy Space Center, 300 million Americans, and 6 billion worldwide, to send these 3 emissaries of the species out to do something remarkable. And Apollo 13 was a reminder of all of that. I'd like to think it will always serve that role.